Here's two guys that survived riding a DeLorean filled with Coca-Cola products, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 56 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, it's the annual Play With Your Bag show. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan,
and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com. Okay, so today's show is, what is a Bob?
Bob who?
Exactly. Where is Bob? What about Bob?
Yep. We can get into a whole weird Abbott and Costello routine right now.
I think we might, which is funny because we kind of did last time we had a survival bags discussion. You know, the last time we had a discussion about survival bags, we talked about a lot of different kinds of survival bags and how they can intermingle with one another. And we realized it's been 9 months since the last time we talked about it. So it's a new year. So we're going to refresh the topic and go back into it. And actually, I think we're pretty much going to dedicate the entire show today to Bobs, their uses, what they are, what they aren't, and what all you can put in them, and what all you can do with them, and what you probably shouldn't do with them.
Yeah, don't put your neighbor in the Bob. It's a bad idea.
That's weird, dude.
I know. You know. Tried it once.
I don't want to know anymore. I don't want to be held liable for any of this. So with that in mind, we're going to give a fair warning today, having nothing to do with stuffing your neighbor in your Bob, more having to do with Bobs are an opinion. Mm-hmm. Not the person Bob, obviously, more of what you put in your Bob is an opinion. And while we may have some strong opinions about the contents of a Bob, I really do believe that Bobs are an opinion in the sense that you have to decide what you're going to put in your Bob, what you need to get through a situation, and what a Bob even means to you.
It surprises me when I think about it, just how much a Bob discussion becomes a lot like the handgun discussion. What's right for me may not be right for you, and the same thing goes for your Bob. I mean, it's really such a personal thing. It's sort of like as you stock your home for bugging in that we recently talked about. And, you know, what do you need? Well, the basics are all the same. And I think we're going to, we'll go over some of those basics for the Bob too. Those are all the same too. But it's when you start getting past that initial list of just a few items that you go, all right, my needs and your needs may be similar, but they're not the same.
Well, let's back up for a second. And a lot of people that are new to prep will hear the terms go bag and bug out bag and Bob. Maybe you'll see pictures all over the internet and you'll see some pretty subdued bags, and you'll see some other bags that look like they've strapped every possible piece of weaponry and military-type equipment onto the sides.
Yeah, I like to call those the at-home Special Forces Bob.
But to put all that aside for a minute, in its most basic form, a bug-out bag is meant to get you from point A, wherever you are, to point B being your bug out location.
And to be, just to throw this in, a pre-planned bug out location.
Yes, and that is an important distinction. In general, Bobs are considered to be something that will get you through 72 hours. Now, why only 72 hours? And we've talked about in a previous show that we kind of have this theory that 72 hours comes essentially from wilderness rescue, that after 72 hours, your chances of being rescued and surviving to be rescued basically just crashes through the floor after about 72 hours. That is the time frame in which you need to be rescued, or most people statistically need to be rescued in. That's kind of our theory of where 72 hours comes from. The other piece of that is, in most instances, carrying more stuff becomes extremely heavy. And I think even 72 hours for a lot of people just starting off, their bags become extremely heavy.
Yeah, and it would probably actually diminish your chances of getting to where you need to go.
Yeah, and I think that segues us nicely into the discussion about what is the optimal weight for a bug out bag. And I'm going to give the blanket statement of I don't know. It depends on you, it depends on your physical condition, and it depends on what are your capabilities. There's basically within 72 hours, and I think it's called the 3-day rucksack rule, and author John Heatherly wrote an entire article about it, which I will link to today in the show notes. But the optimal weight really has to do with you. Like for me, for instance, I have a double fusion, which means that there is a bunch of metal in my back. I had a fracture in my youth that progressed and became an issue for me. Now, while I'm all bolted back together with titanium rods, I still don't necessarily like to put a lot of pressure on my back. I do my best to put as little pressure on my back as possible. And even though some of the larger packs will distribute weight to your hips, I still just don't like doing it. So, but maybe you have other issues. Maybe you've got bad feet. Maybe you've got bad knees. These are all things that need to be considered. When we run into building out these bags, we want to try to, or we have this tendency as preppers, especially new preppers, to put everything, including the kitchen sink, into that bag for every possible scenario.
Right. Well, and there's even beyond health issues. You could be a 130-pound woman listening to the show and think, okay, what size bag do I need? And Aaron, who's sitting at, I'm taking a stab in the wind, 175, 170, somewhere in there, that you can carry a much different size bag, even with your fusion, than, say, your girlfriend, who is only nearer to 5 feet tall and much lesser in weight.
She's a small thing.
Right. So, I mean, it goes back to that, too. This all goes to a lot of personal preference, your own health, your own physique, what you can carry. Because remember, the Bob is not your car bag. That's different. This is the bag that you can strap to your back and go.
It is to kind of go back to this topic, it's very easy to see such a wide range of bags when you go through forums or when you go through articles. And even in Doomsday Prepper, one of the people that was in one of the more recent shows had a full, I want to take a stab at about a 55-liter camping bag full of stuff. And part of her bug out plan was to get to a bug out vehicle on foot quite a few miles away. That proved troublesome for her. And part of that also was that she had not been, as far as I understood, I could be completely wrong about this, but she had not been training with that bag. And so it was new to her. And that's another thing, too, that if you're going to make this bag, and you need to make sure that that bag is conducive to your bug out plan. If that includes being on foot, at which you should have some plans for at least going some distance on foot with your bag, that you need to be able to carry that or have some arrangements for it. Some of the other things that you kind of think about with a bug out bag is that as far as what they are and what the benefit is of having a bug out bag, besides keeping you alive and keeping you comfortable within reason for 72 hours, they are a tremendous time saver. If you are in the instance where you actually have to use a bug out bag, one, you want to be able to leave as quickly as possible. The moment you make that decision that it's time to go, you need to be out the door shortly thereafter. Part of that is, and we reference this often because it is our frame of reference, but with hurricanes, we see that when they issue the evacuation order, there's a little bit of time, and then the freeways essentially shut down because the entire city has tried to get on the freeway to get out.
Right. People tend not to listen carefully to those evacuation orders, and you have to remember most people are actually asked to shelter in place, which goes to the last show of bugging in. But again, you will find that whenever a small group of people are asked to leave, huge amounts of people try to do it, and it blocks the streets. So you have to be able to react quickly, and being able to grab an accessible bag that has the stuff you need and you know it's there is critical.
And it keeps everything together. That's one less thing that you need to think about before you're trying to get out the door is, did I remember this? Did I remember that? It has all of your stuff that you need already in it. You don't have to think about, what medications do I need? Do I have food? Do I have water? Do I have baby formula? Whatever it is.
Right, and this goes back to the 72-hour discussion again, which is you don't want to pack too much. You don't want to create a list that's a mile long. You want to create just the stuff you need to get to the location that you have pre-planned that has the rest of your stuff.
Exactly. And to kind of touch on a subject that we mentioned a few minutes ago, or that John mentioned a few minutes ago about a car bag, and that is the last time we talked about this, which was episode 16, which will be linked to in the show notes. We talked about using a combination of bags. Thinking back, quite a ways back, I had a friend that was building his bug out bag, and he was including a lot of tools in his bag. Not a terrible idea, but the weight became ridiculous and the bulk became ridiculous. And so that's kind of where you can, some of the things that you feel like you really will need or really will want, those are things you can kind of shove off on your car bag. And think of your car bag as a way of supplementing your needs with your bug out bag. That's not to say, and we come to another interesting point here of, what do I do with my bug out bag? Where do I keep my bug out bag? There are people that keep their bug out bag with them every day, that they bring it into the house with them at night. They take it with them into their car during the day. They bring it with them into the office during the day, or they just leave it in their car during the day. That's another personal decision you have to make. For me personally, I'm 16 blocks from my office. So for me, taking a bug out bag to my office doesn't seem that necessary, especially when I have a pretty well-stocked car bag. It all depends on what you want, and it all depends on what's going to make you the most comfortable.
Right, and I think that's the key word there, though, that you just brought up, comfort. For me, I'm a lot like you are in this case, Aaron. You know, we come from the same mindset on it. My bug out bag is kept in the closet, and it's very accessible for me. It's got all my stuff in it. My wife's bug out bag's right next to it. We could easily grab that and go from the house. But I keep a separate, smaller bag with me all the time. It's just my everyday carry stuff. And then in my car, there's another car bag. It's all about comfort level. And if you feel like you need to have your bob in the trunk of the car, go for it. You know, we're not telling you not to. Just make sure it's somewhere that you can get to it if that call for leaving comes.
And generally, these calls for leaving they're not instant. It's usually you've got time. And by time, you know, unless we're talking about a chemical spill or something, in which case it may be more advantageous to shelter in place.
Right. And if you live in an earthquake environment, you know, that's another time where you might have to leave quickly because the structure of the building you're in isn't very good anymore, or something like that. So there are cases where that happens. But if you're in an area where it's storm related, or even in California with the fires, unless you're right there where the beginning of the fire happened, you're going to know it's coming for a little while. So you could be prepared. You know, it's all about preparation, is all about getting ready in advance. And that's the key here. It's the bob is all about getting ready in advance.
Exactly. And it's about, like we said before, not forgetting things, not having to worry about forgetting things, which brings up the first point of this is that, like Jonathan mentioned earlier, that his wife also has her own bob, just as my girlfriend has her own bob. There's two caveats to this. One, every member of your family should have their own bob. And in some cases that includes pets too. Pets should have some kind of small bag of supplies that you're going to take with you in the event you need to evacuate. It would be very easy to get someplace and go, oh crap, we have nothing for, let's say, a dog. We have no food, we have no water bowl, some basic supplies. And I think for dogs at least, I don't know how well this would work for a cat, but for dogs, at least, they do make saddlebags that you can then put the bag on the dog, and the dog is then essentially responsible for its own bob.
Yes, also doesn't work well with very small dogs.
No, wouldn't imagine.
Cats and very small dogs, those don't work well.
Maybe a ferret bug out bag?
Yeah, ferret bug out bag. If you have a larger dog, though, those things are great. I actually know some people who do have those for every time they go hiking, too. Dog carries all its own stuff. Food, medical gear. Everything that dog might need for the journey is in those kits, and it's really nicely done.
The importance of this is And this kind of, in part, goes back to the weight. You can't carry enough stuff for a bunch of people, or for even two people, considering what all needs to go in this and keep you going for the length of time that you're going to need to keep going. The other problem is, if, let's say we have a husband and wife, something happens to the husband. The wife is then screwed because he had all the supplies. And I point that out only because apparently that is a very common thing, that the husband builds a bag, the wife thinks he's got all the stuff. And this was even mentioned, and we even mentioned this in the last time we talked about this, that is in Les Stroud's book, that when he used to run kind of adventure trips or whatever, that he would run into that all the time, where the husband would be carrying everything and the wife would just say, oh, well, he's got everything, I'm fine. And it's, well, what if you two get separated? What if something happens to him? The other caveat to this is, if you are not familiar with your own bag, and this is another thing, I think each person should be familiar with the contents and how to use the contents of their bag, and they should have some role in what goes into the bag. And going back to weight again, it should be sure that they can physically handle that bag.
Right. And I think being realistic about what you put in it, I was just dealing with somebody who was actually putting together a birthing kit. Not literally the birthing kit, but the stuff they need to go to the hospital and all that. I guess I don't even know what you'd call it. But they were preparing for all the bags that they would need to go to a hospital for their kid to be born. And for any of you who have done that, you probably can relate to the general story. But they had a list that was like 1.5 miles long. I mean, it was ridiculous. And it got to the point where they had more bags than they could fit in the car. And finally, the woman who I know, her mother stepped in and said, why do you think you need all this stuff? And she went through the list with them one by one and had them explain. She didn't tell them what they did and didn't need. She just had them walk through this list, each item one by one, and explain why they thought they needed it to each other. And by the end, they were down to 2 bags, 1 bag for her clothes and 1 bag for just a few little items they wanted around them that were special to them. Now, that's not the same as the kind of thing that you want to do for a Bob, but that type of logical thinking of going through your list and talking about why you need each item and why it's critical that it be in that bag is something that you might want to do. I mean, Aaron and I still do that. We laugh about some of the stuff that's in our Bobs, actually, because not everything that we originally put in has made it back out. So some of the little things that we put in there at the very beginning didn't exactly ever leave. And, we're guilty of the same thing everybody else is, which is initially you want to take everything, including the kitchen sink, with you.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes with experience, too, which is right. A gear versus skill conversation we'll have at the very end of the show.
Right. But to just kind of finishing that one up, now we look at it, though, and you and I have talked about this a few times, and it's like, if I were designing a bag right now from start to finish, I could probably do the one that is 1/3 the weight of the original one I did, and maybe even less. Mm-hmm. Smaller in size, easier to carry, and just in general, less attention drawing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing if you just logically think through each item instead of just jumping in and saying, it's an emergency, so I'm going to need everything.
Yeah. I think you've touched on another point there, too, that we talked about a little bit last time about gray. And we even did a whole show, I think, a while back on what is gray and what is not gray. And gray, for purposes of this show and for a quick explanation, gray is just you blend in with everything around you. It's the simplest way to put it, and not drawing attention to yourself. And I think those are some of the other things, and that's in part why, and not that I didn't do it, and I'll make this very clear now for anybody that thinks I'm making fun of those people. If I am, it's only because I'm also making fun of myself and even making fun of Jonathan, as he just touched on a minute ago, about these overly tactical bags, these overly militarized bags. And while if that's what makes you happy, knock yourself out. I don't see the need for it, and I see it as something that could potentially draw a lot of unwanted attention to yourself, especially since we're talking about this in an urban context. This is an urban survival show. Are you going to be wandering through the streets of, pick your major city, with an AR strapped over your back out in the open and...
just one of the mil-spec bags with a whole bunch of Molly on it.
Yeah, with covered in Molly and, so many
and Molly accessories.
Yeah, there was a funny video about that where it was Molly on top of Molly on... Anyway, I don't want to get off topic here. But the point is, when I look at those, it's not, I don't want to make fun of the person, but I just think I see that as being more of a problem than it's worth. Not that I don't think you should have those things with you, but I think you should put as much effort into trying to tone it down and not be so blatant about it.
Right. No, I'd agree with you on that one. I think in general, you look at that stuff and you say, if you're a beginner and you really are thinking that what you're planning for is the end of the world as you know it situation, then I can see why doing all that makes perfect sense. But if you logically go through it, and what we've discussed in a lot of shows, the whole idea of planning for the most likely scenario and what you think is really going to happen, then you're less likely to go equip yourself the way a special ops guy might equip himself in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and again, if you've done it, we're not making fun of you. We're
Right.
making fun of you and us because
Yeah,
we've done
everybody
it too.
does it. Everybody does
yeah.
it. I think every beginner goes through that process of, because who are you going to look to? Most of you, the survival preparedness gurus, are all ex-military, and when they talk about it, they talk about it from their military background.
hmm
So the pictures you see are all of the military spec bags with military gear strapped to it. Makes perfect sense, actually. I mean, I get where it all comes from, and that's, I think, you and I talk about it all the time. That's one of the reasons we do the show. We're not in the military, and we're urban livers living urban lifestyles, and we just need to be prepared for the unexpected. And the idea that we have prepared for those items is what we need to be prepared for. It doesn't include Molly and 15 magazines for my AR strapped to me, with the AR strapped underneath and all the rest of the military gear on there. So, it's just a different way of thinking. And the problem is, like I said, it's when you look at all the role models or the people who are giving the major advice, it makes sense that we all end up with the military gear.
Yeah, and I still have all of that gear.
So do I.
Yeah, I mean,
and I still like to play with it. I admit it. Come on. We all like to play soldier.
Oh yeah, I mean, come on, it's fun. But if you show up to another town, having bugged out from your town, looking like you're ready for World War III, you might draw you might draw some attention to yourself you didn't necessarily want to.
Yeah, that unwanted attention is never good. Not during that situation.
Yeah, and if it is a real shit hit the fan scenario, do you really? You're still drawing unwanted attention to yourself. It's tone it down. Don't look interesting.
Right.
Don't look interesting in any way, shape, or form. That's not to say look like a victim or that you're ready to be a victim, but just don't look interesting. Blend in, be gray. Without beating that up any more than we already have, going back to more practical stuff about tailor the bag to your needs. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning about that you have to decide what the issues are that you're going to be coming up against. Are they weather related? Are we talking earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes? What are we talking about here? And so while the items in the bag, basics, isn't really going to change that much, there's nuances to it. So what supplies do you need? And going back to what weight is it? And do you have any special needs, or does anybody that's with you have any special needs that need to be considered? We can even talk for a second about what kind of a bag we're going to use. I mean, I've got a Maxpedition bag that lots of people, the more military style bags, even more so than Maxpedition. We can get into the Alice bags or anything like that, else like that. To me, that's getting a little too tactical, a little too militarized unnecessarily for the majority of instances we're going to run into. There are pluses and minuses to that. Some of those bags are much more rugged. They will stand up to a lot more abuse, but they tend to also be heavier, and they may draw more attention to themselves than a camping bag, whereas a camping bag is going to be more lightweight. The material is going to tear more easily, and in some instances, there are some pretty tough camping bags. So there are a lot of options, but I don't think you need to sweat them as much as people tend to do when they first get started.
Right, and you don't need to necessarily go out and spend the crazy money either. I mean, that's one of the things about some of those really high-end military bags is they can be more expensive than some of the nicest camping bags.
Yeah, like if you look at Mystery Ranch is one of them that makes some really cool bags, and they make real military bags, but man, some of those bags really get up there in price.
On the other hand, if you go and look at some of the REI lightweight hiking bags that are out there, they're very lightweight, they're very functional, they're probably durable enough for your needs, And actually, that's what my wife uses. So because it's so lightweight, she's just got a really nice REI hiking bag, and it actually does carry the 72 hours worth of stuff that she needs very comfortably for her. And the nice part is if we did do a nice hiking, camping adventure, we could do something with the bag as well. So it becomes multi-purpose and multifunctional, which is always nice when you're spending money on something.
Oh, yeah. And that kind of even goes back to a lot of things that we've said in the past of trying to figure out how something makes your life better today. Not just, I mean, some of the stuff for survival, it really is just only useful in survival. But some things, if you really stop and think about it, can be made to be useful in multiple instances. For example, my bug out bag also happens to be my camping bag. It is perfectly set up for either occasion, because I've spent the time over the years and made it a useful bag for either instance.
Right, and the nice part about that, and I've seen you use your bag for that, I've used my bag for that, you can rotate through some of the stuff that's in there. Like, medical kits don't last forever. Certain parts of them do, but other parts don't, like the antibiotic ointment, things like that. So you're going to want to rotate through some of that stuff. Using it as a bag you use to go camping and hiking is a great way to rotate through some of the things in that bag.
And it's a great way to figure out what works in the bag and what doesn't work for you in the bag.
Yeah.
Those are...
If you've got a 3-day camping trip set up, that's a good way to test a 72-hour bag.
Yeah. That's every time we've gone camping in the last few years, I've used my Bob. And every time I have figured out something else about the Bob that either I didn't need that needed to come out of it, or something that I did need that wasn't in there. And then, of course, too, you have to think of, is that an isolated incident? Or is it something that really does belong in there?
Yep.
One of the other things that we didn't mention in the last episode where we talked about bags was, and something I've become a big proponent of, is having what I like to call a pre-flight checklist. And it's kind of just like it sounds. Like, pilots have a pre-flight checklist where they go down a row of things that they need to check on a plane before they put the plane in the air. And you need to have the same thing on the outside of your bug out bag and each one of the bug out bags. Maybe the kids don't need it. Maybe they do. That's up to you, depending on their age and depending on their involvement in getting out. But a pre-flight checklist, and it just maybe it can be handwritten list. It can be, you can make it on the computer and print it out and laminate it. But it should be something that hangs off your bag that are, what are the necessary steps that need to happen as soon as you've made the decision to evacuate? What do you need to do to your home to secure your home before you evacuate? Is there anything in the way of valuables that you feel need to be taken with you that are not in your Bob? Because obviously there is stuff that you're going to want to take with you within reason that you're not going to keep in your Bob because it's stuff you either use every day or it's of sentimental value and you have it out on display, whatever reason.
Right, or it may even be there's some valuables you take with you and some that you want to lock in your safe.
Yeah,
that's something we do whenever we end up having to, either when hurricanes came through and we had to leave, or when we were traveling, we do the same thing.
So it's just a simple list. What are the things that you need to make sure get done, both to leave and to secure things for after you've left? I really do feel very strongly about that, and I think it's so easy to just talk about Bobs as this thing that we grab and run out the door with, but there is so much more involved in the time from the time you make that decision to leave to the time you put that bag on and walk out your door. Because it's, in most instances, it's not going to be an instantaneous process. You're going, like we said, you're going to lock up your valuables, lock up your house, maybe take some of your valuables with you. You're going to need to make sure that perhaps all of your children make it into the vehicle. Who hadn't seen Home Alone? So, wow, that would be a weird movie, Home Alone Armageddon episode. But
it's going to come out on the Learning Channel sometime soon.
Wait, no, Nat Geo.
Nat Geo, I'm sorry.
Macaulay Culkin may be a little old to play that role now.
Yes. Hopefully, well, he might be one of the parents at this point.
That's
or
true.
The strung out neighbor, one or the other.
I shouldn't laugh at that. That's horrible.
And yet we laugh.
But going beyond the checklist of what you need to do before you leave your home, you also should kind of put together a checklist of the items that you're going to have in your bag. That is a thing that you can review on a regular basis to decide whether or not it is actually something that you need in your bag or add to it. Or it can be another thing where if you borrow something from the bag, and I'll give an example in a minute, you borrow something from the bag, it can be something that maybe you mark on that checklist that you've taken out of the bag. This is a separate checklist from the checklist of what to do to get out of the house, your pre-flight checklist. An example of that is a couple weeks ago, our can opener broke. We use a manual can opener. I've had the thing for years, and all of a sudden one night I was opening a can of something, I don't know, and the can opener practically exploded in my hand, broke into pieces because I am so manly. No. I don't know what the hell happened to the thing.
I wasn't even going to touch that.
So it was my survival guns torn to pieces. So, but no,
Don't shoot at your can opener.
Well, that's how you get them open, isn't it? But anyway,
that's different.
But I have a couple P51 military can openers in my Bob. They're great. They're awesome. If you buy like a 10-pack of them or something, I think they come out to be less than $1 a piece. And they really do work exceptionally well at getting a can opener. And I think you can open bottles with them too. I've never tried. But I went into my Bob and I pulled one out of my Bob and used it for a few days before I had a chance to go to the store and get a new can opener. And it was one of the things, when I took it out, I had to mark it on the list that I'd taken it out. And as soon as I got a new can opener, I had to put the thing back in there so that it was there when I needed it again. To kind of move past that into what are the items that should go in a bug out bag. And again, this is an opinion for people that like to get worked up about things, about when we're stating fact and opinion. This is an opinion about what should go in there. And these are the basics.
It's a strong opinion, though.
It is
I'm
very
going
strong
with that
opinion.
at least.
I will agree with that. It is a very strong opinion of what should go in there. We can start with the basics of food. And food is complicated in that you're probably not going to want to put canned goods in your bug out bag because that's going to be heavy. And the best options that we've run across are the freeze-dried and dehydrated.
Yeah, they work great, and they're so lightweight.
Yeah. And I've completely forgotten the name of it.
Mountain House?
No, but that is one of them. There's another one, and it's actually what's in my bag. It'll be in the link to the show notes. It starts with a D, and I can never remember the name of it. Mm-hmm. But it's one package of them is about 3,600 calories, which is enough if you're staying mostly inactive for a person. You can stretch yourself out for most people. Most adults could stretch themselves out over 2 days on 3,600 calories. But they're a small enough brick that you can actually pretty easily put about 3 or 4 of those in a adult size bug out bag, and even a regular kind of school backpack that you were going to use. They're not very big. Dehydrated and freeze dried are the easiest because most of the weight has been removed. They're usually vacuum sealed, so they've taken all the air out. Those products the most work has been done to try to minimize their weight and size as much as possible. So you've got the one that I can never remember that starts with a D. And there's Mountain House. There's also MREs, which aren't really freeze-dried. I don't even know what MREs... I mean, obviously, physically, I know what they are, but the process of making them and what...
Nobody knows.
Yeah, I don't think
nobody knows. And you really probably don't want to. They're cheap. They are your least expensive option, though, usually.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad idea, but I think the Mountain House and the one that you've got are better tasting.
Mm.
And the nice part is you're only talking about 72 hours here, so you don't need a ton of food. And the lightweight aspect, like the Mountain House stuff, is really designed for people who are doing long range, like super lightweight backpacking. And so their weight has been reduced to the bare minimum.
Some sort of means of procuring food, and that could be something as simple as a .22 handgun. That can mean snares and traps. That can mean all kinds of stuff. And again, it depends on what situation are you planning on evacuating for. Right. And this brings up an interesting one, and I've been trying to find a way of working this into one of our episodes for months now, which is the debate over pellet gun versus .22. There is the argument for a pellet gun is that pellets are lighter and that a pellet gun is legal in more places. Both of those are true. A 22 has a longer range. It's a heavier projectile, so it's not going to be as susceptible to wind.
And you gain a significant, I mean, with that, you gain a significant amount of versatility.
Oh, yeah. And it can be used as a personal defense weapon, whereas, I could be wrong about this, but I do not believe there is a pellet gun on the market that could legitimately be used as a personal defense weapon.
Yeah, I'll venture to even say there probably is a pellet gun on the market that can do it. If you can find it and afford it, you're probably better off with the 22.
Yeah. The other aspect of that is something that we've talked about before, which are suppressors. If we are really talking about a really messed up situation where that is our means of procuring food, a suppressor might be a pretty good idea. And that's kind of one of the other arguments for pellet guns too, is that they're going to be much quieter than a 22. I will tell you this, my suppressed 22 is actually quieter than my pellet gun.
Yeah, even my suppressed 22 pistol is quieter than a pellet gun, and pistols tend to be very loud because there's not a lot of room for the it's a sound issue and how it gets captured and all that. And I'm not even going to get into it. We did a suppressor show another time, but the pistols are usually pretty loud. And my 22, I've got a Ruger Mark II with a threaded barrel from Tactical Solutions. So you replace the entire upper on the pistol with this threaded barrel. So it's very lightweight because it's an aluminum upper. And with the suppressor and everything, extremely lightweight and very, very quiet. It's actually quieter than my pellet gun pistol that I've got.
And this is a suggestion for people sitting around that are thinking, or that come to find that suppressors are not legal in their area, or for those parts of the world or parts of the United States where handguns are more trouble than they're worth to get, if even possible, then you make do with what you can, and you make allowances around that. This is, again, a general conversation of what we recommend and what we think is a good idea to have. Moving on to what you put your food in. A mess kit is a great idea, and having utensils. The plastic ones are great if you really want the titanium ones and you want to spend the money on it and knock yourself out. I don't see the purpose in them. They make some heavy-duty plastic camping ones that are pretty cheap.
Yeah, I look at it this way. If you've got the cash, and it's something you want, with the mess kits, you really can. Sky's the limit on some of those. I think you and I have seen titanium ones that are well above $100 a set. And we've seen plastic ones that do the exact same job.
Yeah.
For dollars.
Yeah.
So it's really up to you.
And I wish I had a mess kit I could actually recommend. I have been trying to find a mess kit that I like for, I'm actually going to say 20 years. I have never found a mess kit I actually like. Every single one of them, I'm just like, this is just wrong, but I can't tell you what to do to actually fix it.
Yeah, I'm just using one I got from the local sporting goods store that just happens to be small enough to be okay, but big enough to actually use for something. And I've been searching for the perfect one and haven't found it yet. So if anybody has suggestions on really good mess kits, let us know, because neither one of us has really been able to find one we really like.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure at some point in the last few years I have spent more time than is reasonable looking at mess kits. But moving on to water, the next big one. You should have both a means of storing water and a means of purifying water.
But you probably don't want to try to carry all 72 hours worth of water.
Yeah, that would probably be not a good idea. Now, we have talked about using the Reliance water containers, and those are something that you could either keep empty or keep full, fill up, and throw in your vehicle, as long as you're not driving a moped. As long as it's a car of some kind or truck, you should have enough room to throw in, a couple of those 5-gallon Reliance water containers into your vehicle. And it's, you could fill them up from a garden hose and be done with it, and it's not going to taste the greatest, but at least it gets you out the door. Or you can do what I did, which is actually buy spring water and fill your containers with that and then seal them up real good. And, of course, making sure that you wash those things out when you first purchase them. Because who knows what kid is spit in them or peed in them, or who knows what goes on in those stores.
Yeah, just a tad bit of like a cap full of bleach and some water. I'll clean that out. And
yeah. And as far as purifying goes, there are a bunch of ways to purify water. There are the water purifiers, which again, we're still looking at water purifiers. I don't think we've ever actually found one that we really, really liked, that we also found was a reasonable price.
When we do, we will probably do an entire show on it. So
Probably that and mess kits, apparently. And there's other ways of purifying water. So you can boil water. There's all kinds of information online about using chlorine bleach to purify water. You can use the purification tablets. Something, or at least more than one means of purifying water is probably a good idea. Moving on to shelters, and I think this also comes into having both something on hand as a shelter and having a means of procuring shelter. And that can be going back to something that we've talked about often, which is keeping cash in your bug out bag. And you should keep as much cash as you feel financially comfortable doing. And that cash should be enough to be able to buy food for yourself, or to be able to, once you get to a location, to extend the amount of time that you have. Because again, you're only carrying enough for 72 hours. When you get to a location, if it turns out that you need to stay there longer, one, it may end up that you have to rent a hotel room. And two, you may need to purchase more supplies once you get there. So carrying cash on hand in the bag, and again, that goes back to how much can you afford in the way of cash to put into the bag, should be in there.
right, and this goes back to another discussion we had, which is if you can clear a danger zone, again, not thinking in terms of the end of the world scenario, but if you can clear a danger zone where there's power issues, this is a case where having a credit card is not a bad thing. We're not telling you to use it as a credit card. Pay it off monthly, do what you can. Not a financial show right now, but the idea is having a credit card on hand that you can use in these emergencies is critical.
Yeah, because it could mean that you need medical attention, and
Right.
there's a lot of hospitals now that are pretty much like, you better give us some kind of plastic to prove that you're
Yeah.
financially responsible for this
Hotels as
situation.
well.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of hotels where you can't check in with cash.
You need a way of procuring and a means of some basic means of shelter. And in most cases, you're probably going to be bugging out. You're going to have your vehicle with you. Your vehicle then can become your shelter. If you run into an instance where you have had to abandon your vehicle, or for whatever reason there was just something that happened and you are on foot, they make tube tents that are like $15. It's not going to be the Taj Mahal, but it is going to be better than being out in the elements. Tents in general can get, especially when you're talking about the lightweight tents and the small compact stuff that would actually fit easily in a bug out bag, those can get extremely expensive. And I think for the most part, unless it's what you're actually using to go camping with, they're unnecessary. They can easily run like $600, just kind of a general ballpark for the size of tent and the weight of tent that you would actually want to use for a bug out bag. And again, unless that if that's your thing and you like the lightweight hiking thing, and you're going to use it, then to me that is a reasonable purchase. If you're not, buy one of the cheap tube tents and throw it in there and be done. Throw one in each bag and be done with it.
Right.
If you've come to that situation, it's something's better than nothing. Another thing that kind of does actually fall under shelter that probably didn't think of as shelter is clothing. And clothing is your first layer of shelter, and it's actually a shelter we walk around with every day. It's what, the purpose of shelter is to essentially keep us warm, dry, and protect us from the elements. And that's, for the most part, what your clothing does. Keep the basics in there. A couple pairs of socks. Personally, I would highly recommend wool socks. They will last longer in general.
They'll also be good in the cold and the heat. That's the other thing. So even in the summer, you're good, and in the winter, you're good.
Long pants. And I think another thing is that, at least depending on the part of the country or world that you live in, and depending on how many seasons you have, like where I am in Houston, there are two seasons. There is kind of cool, and then there's really hot and humid. So having a lot of cold weather gear in my bag is unnecessary. I keep a fleece in there. I keep long underwear in there. I keep a poncho in there for rain. My girlfriend's bag is set up the exact same way. And that's all I need. But you may be in an area where you need more insulation and you need thicker clothing and stuff. Another thing is gloves. And this is not necessarily the Oakley shooting, busting down door gloves. If you want them and you have them and that's your thing, that's fine. But I would actually recommend a good pair of leather work gloves. They're going to keep the cold off your hands for the most part. And you may need to move debris out of the way to either move your vehicle or to get from point A to point B. And so now you actually have a tough pair of gloves that you can do that. Because injuring your hand in one of these situations can be really disastrous for you, both from an infection standpoint and a loss of something a tool of yours, which is what your hands are, that is so important. Moving on to the next topic, which would be security and tools. We're just kind of mix those together. So lights. Lights come in a variety of flavors and expenses. I think some of the mag lights are fine. The Surefire lights and all those other more military style or police style lights that can get into the hundreds of dollars. It kind of goes back to like what we were talking about titanium earlier. If it
Right.
works for you and it's what you like, go for it.
And in this particular case, I know you do too. We've both got Surefires. We love our Surefires. I also happen to like at the lower end of the spectrum, not quite towards the Maglite, more like in between Maglite and Surefire, is a company called Streamlight. They make excellent products. And then you really can't go wrong with the Maglites. So really, at any level of the spectrum here, you're going to have a tool that does the job it's supposed to do.
And the more expensive lights are great. They're very rugged. You can beat them to death, and they're going to keep ticking. Some of them take more specialized batteries, and that is an instance where, and we'll talk more about this in a bit when we get to energy, you are going to want to make sure that you have it. Especially if you have specialty batteries, because what are they? The CR123 batteries.
Yeah, those CR123s are great. They're powerful and they can really get the flashlight bright, but they are harder to come by. I mean, you can't necessarily get those everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something to consider. They're not as versatile as, say, a flashlight that takes AA's or AAA's.
And headlamps. We talk about headlamps all the time because they're awesome.
Yeah, love headlamps. Can't go wrong with a headlamp.
Headlamps free up your hands, and most of the time when you're using a flashlight, it always seems like you end up sticking in your mouth.
The first time I put a headlamp on, I was thinking to myself the entire time, why did I not buy one of these sooner?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I use it for everything. Even if I have to go outside and flip a breaker on the house or something, that's what I put on at night. I don't go bring a flashlight now. I just stick the headlamp on and go.
Mm-hmm. Guns and weapons. The weapons part of the conversation I'll leave up to you, the listener, whatever you're comfortable with. Guns, obviously, if they are appropriate in your area and you can legally possess one, you should. For some people, maybe they only have one weapon, and that is their carry weapon. That's their everyday, and that's everything to them. And regardless of how many weapons you have, or guns, I should say, if you carry a gun and you're going to have a gun, have at least one box of ammo in your bag. And I don't think you should, try to stuff a military dry box in your bob. That would be awesome if we could, but that's a lot of weight. So,
well, this kind of goes back to the 22 discussion we had earlier also. If the 22 is the only one you're going to bring, that's fine. I mean, the 22 can put food on a table. It can act as a defensive weapon. There are better ones for defense, but you could use a 22. And the nice part about a 22 is even an entire brick of 500 rounds really isn't that heavy, but you don't need to bring 500 rounds. If you took a couple of boxes of the 50s and say made it 200 rounds, that's pretty lightweight. And you can disperse that throughout the bag so you really evenly distribute that weight. And it doesn't add a lot at all. But that is 200 rounds is a lot of ammunition for 72 hours.
Oh, absolutely. And a pocket knife, a simple, good pocket knife, and a simple fixed blade knife. They do have different uses, and we did a whole show on knives, which we will link to in the show notes. A multi-tool. Multi-tools are great, and a multi-tool can actually take the place of a pocket knife if you want to save weight and take one more thing out of your bag, because most multi-tools, especially like the Leatherman New Wave, have a decent enough blade on them for pocket knife purposes.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about it. Out of all of them, and we've each tried a ton of them, the Leatherman New Wave is the best one I've found for me. Again, that's personal preference. The Leatherman New Wave, and the only reason I'm throwing the new in there, I'm not sure what the difference between the Wave and the New Wave is.
Is there even just a Wave anymore?
I don't really know, but Amazon, I can't remember which way they list it, but for a while they were listing it as the New Wave. But we'll have a link to it in the website in the show notes. But that really is the most versatile, best one I've found yet.
Paracord has a million and one uses. It's nylon cord that can hold up to 550 pounds. It can be broken down to smaller individual pieces if you take the sheath off of it, and you can use the individual strands. It is super cheap, and there's no reason to not just throw a 50-foot hank of paracord in your bag. Yard trash bags, folded up, one or two. There are a lot of uses for trash bags. One for obviously collecting your own trash wherever you go. They can also be turned into makeshift sleeping bags.
Or the roof for shelter.
Yeah, you never know what ends up. And which also comes to a roll of duct tape, which is helpful in just about any instance. As far as medical go, as long as you put a very basic first aid kit in there and any prescriptions you have in there.
And remember, for prescriptions and things like that, this is one of those cases where you're going to want to use these things as you go through. So,
yeah.
Don't put them in there one day and then a year later go, oh yeah, they're in there. I'm not worried.
As far as hygiene goes, hygiene actually does become pretty important in these instances. You're going to want keeping yourself clean. It has to do with your comfort level. There are additional issues that can unnecessarily come up because you did not take into account the need for hygiene. One of those things is feminine napkins, tampons, however you want to refer to them. If you're a man, I don't necessarily see the need for them in your bag. And as we've talked about in the past, they could be used for bullet holes, but it's really not recommended. And unless you're preparing for war or something else, there are much better products on the market that you use for bullet hole wounds than tampons. Dental, so, toothpaste, toothbrush, dental floss. These are things that, again, it's stuff that you want to keep up with. Soap. I don't like the little hard soap dishes that you can get. Don't spend the money. Use a Ziploc bag. Double bag it if you need to. Talc powder is always a good idea because, again, you may wind up on foot.
Well, and chafing actually can get infected.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we live in the regular world and nothing bad's going on, you don't worry about stuff like that. But in a bad scenario, chafing can actually become a problem and cause infection.
Not to mention it can slow you down if you're trying to move.
Yeah, it becomes painful.
Yeah. Moleskins are another thing, and moleskins are essentially, if you do get a blister, it's kind of a bandage that you can put over blisters. Again, we'll link to those. There's going to be in the show note a link in the show notes to a whole list of random stuff that is good ideas that you might put in your bag. That it's kind of one of those Amazon list mania things. So we'll mention again towards the end of the show that it's there. But to also kind of round out, the last thing is a roll of toilet paper. Put a roll of toilet paper in each of the bags. And to kind of move on to energy, and we talked about that a little while ago, the classic, have a way to make fire. Actually, have more than one way to make fire. My personal favorite are the fire steels, and sometimes they're called the Swedish fire steels. And I think they have a couple of different, they're also called ferro rods sometimes. They're pretty inexpensive. They're very easy to use. The magnesium blocks are also great. People really like the waterproof matches, and I'm sure there can be a good argument made for them. I just haven't thought of it. And when I was reading Cody Lundin's book, he actually made up a very good point that to use a fire steel versus the waterproof matches actually take more manual dexterity. So if you're suffering from hypothermia, you may not be able to use the matches, whereas you would actually be able to use the fire steel. So things to consider, maybe put both in your bag. Maybe even put 3 kinds in your bag. I know in my bag I actually do have a fire steel, a magnesium block, a Bic lighter, and matches.
Yeah, and for those of you that have the those at-home food savers, the little vacuum-sealed food saver things, you can create a little vacuum-sealed bag for your own matches and add a little extra protection.
Oh, yeah. And there's all kinds of little solar panels now on the market for charging cell phones and your little gadgets. I think those are a really great investment if you're on a budget. It's not something that you absolutely have to have, but John and I both have the Juice Orange. We wrote a whole review about it. We talked about it often. What are they, about $100?
$150 now, so they have gone up in price.
Oh, wow. Okay. But they're awesome. They work well. They're very sturdy. They're not terribly big. And I used mine to power my cell phone and an iPad for an entire week on a vacation to Mexico. So they
Yeah.
work well. It's a consideration. Again, batteries for all the little gadgets you're going to have. Really think about what you have. And that includes the batteries for your car alarm remote. And if your home has a alarm remote on it or something, batteries for that. And I think that that's something that people actually do forget a lot. They don't think about the fact that their car alarm remote needs batteries. And in most cars these days, that is tied to the ignition kill because that's part of our car alarms. If you can't use the remote, in most instances, you will not be able to undo the ignition lock, essentially, or the ignition kill from the alarm. Even if you get in and you with the keys and the get the key in the ignition, it still won't start. So have those extra batteries.
Yeah, and remember, we're not telling you to pack a month's supply of batteries here. So when all of you thinking, wow, that's going to weigh a lot, it's 72 hours.
Yeah.
So a set of extra batteries is all you really need for a lot of these things.
Yeah. And some form of communication, so cell phone. And they make some really cheap cell phones these days. And I'm not necessarily saying you go out and get one of the prepaid cell phones because I think those do actually expire. But one of the cheaper cell phones where you could, if something happened to your cell phone, you could pop the SIM card out and pop it into the other phone. And then going back to one of the solar panels or even having a car charger or something with you that you could then charge up that phone and make a phone call for emergency services or call loved ones or whatever you need. And there is actually a phone on the market now that I think has a battery life, and they're $50, and they have a standby battery life of 15 years. That's kind of crazy. I wasn't able to find a direct link to them the other day. Some of the links people have sent me, that those links have kind of died. But if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes today. Have cell phone charging cables. They're not that expensive. Throw an extra one in your bag. Throw an extra one in your vehicle. They're not that expensive, and it could be the difference between being able to make a phone call and not being and having a cell phone that's completely useless because batteries are dead. They also make inverters for cars. I think you can pick them up for as cheap as $30 or $40 at like Walmart, and they just plug into your cigarette lighter, and you can actually plug 2 or even 3 electrical devices into them. And an inverter, for without spending a whole bunch of time on it, essentially takes the 12 volts from a vehicle and kicks it up to the 120 volts like it is from your home's wall outlet. Radios are not a bad idea. Also, they could be a way of, if you and your spouse or members of your evacuation party need to split up for any reason, radios can be a great way of communicating when cell phones aren't working or when you just don't want to use the batteries on your cell phone. That's a totally optional piece of equipment, but a pretty decent idea in my personal opinion. Another piece, and we've talked about this on a regular basis, and there's, again, a whole article about it that we'll link to from the show notes, which is a personal information packet. And I think we even talked about in the last show that we're strong proponents of both having a physical and digital version of your personal information packet.
And it doesn't hurt to keep a spare digital copy in your bob, in addition to the one that you might have on your keychain, keeping one in the bob.
Yeah. Navigation. GPSs are great. A lot of us have GPSs in our smartphones now, but maybe you don't want to use the battery from your cell phone for GPS purposes. There's also having good old-fashioned maps, which can be kept in Ziploc bags. Knowing how to read maps would be a very good and important skill to have, especially if you're planning on being a prepper and survivalist and ever needing to evacuate. Having a compass may not be a bad idea. And
knowing how to use a compass.
Yeah, again, and that goes back to map reading and orientating. These are skills that would be highly recommended. And so to kind of round out and wrap up the show, what is the difference between gear and skill? So we've spent all this time talking about essentially something that is a giant piece of gear, which is your bug out bag. Gear is a tool, and it's meant to allow you to do something better or do something that's just not physically possible. But gear should never be, I went to the store, I bought all this stuff, I stuffed it in a bag, I stuck it in my closet, and I never touched it.
Right. It's, this is the same thing as any other item out there. And maybe the way to kind of put it for people is if you went and bought yourself the best grand piano in the world and stuck it in your living room, that does not make you a pianist or even someone who knows what the notes are. So having the equipment doesn't really do anything for you until you know how to use it.
Yeah, all it will do is provide you a false sense of security. That
Right.
when the shit hits the fan, that you're going to be okay. And that may or may not be true. And that's another reason why I'm very much against the prepackaged bug out kits. I can't stand them. I think they're a horrible idea. I know why people buy them because it's okay, well, that's taken care of. If an emergency ever happens, then I can just grab that thing that I've never opened that, maybe I barely even took the tags off of when it arrived in the mail. If you don't understand the pieces and parts in your bug out bag and understand actually how to use them, and even better, how to do without them, then the chances of a successful evacuation and survival thereafter, if it's more than just a mild scenario, I don't see going well. I really don't, and I think it's very foolhardy.
Right. Or you're just going to cause yourself a lot more pain and trouble than it was worth. It's so easy to go through these things and learn how to use most of what we talked about today. These aren't the complicated things. These aren't the difficult things. These are the things that are a lot easier to deal with. Like, using the can opener. Go out and if you're going to go buy one of the military can openers, the P51 or the P38, try it out. Use it. So the first time you have to use it is not the first time you're actually using it. Same thing goes for if you do go out and buy a tent. Well, put that tent together in your own backyard or even in your living room if you have to. Put it together, see how it all works, and then put it back in its bag and put it away. But know how to use it, because if you get out there and you do have to use it for some reason, you don't want to cause yourself the pain of being caught in a rainstorm and having to put a tent up, or being caught in the middle of the dark and with a wife who's unhappy and kids who aren't happy and having to do something or having to find something, even like not knowing where things in your bag are. All those things just cause you extra pain. And the whole point of this is to eliminate as much pain as possible.
Yeah. Or even worse, finding out, as a friend of ours did, once you get out there and get in the middle of the night trying to put together a tent, that you're missing very important pieces.
Like a whole pole.
So with that, remember that all of the items and stuff that we've mentioned today and all kinds of links to articles will be in the show notes. So be sure to check those out. As a side note, if you heard any weird gaps or pops or hisses in the show today, we apologize. Jonathan and I were having connectivity issues again, and it was affecting our ability to pay attention and also just causing some little hickeys in the show. But with that, we wrap up episode 56. Thank you for joining us. If you like the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. And if you didn't, well, why not tell us about it using the contact form on the site? Seriously, the show's for you, the listener, and if you have something to say, we're listening. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you'll receive updates about the site, notifications of new articles, and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode where we invite you to comment on the show, interact with us, interact with each other, and let the world know what you're thinking. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.